Cool, it started.
Are you ready for this?
I'm super excited. If I can get my acid. Oh, I curse too, so.
All right. So, hi, this is Stacy Harder. Welcome to Lipstick, Lollipops, and Hope, where we open up honestly about many different topics, and we try to share some hope on every one of them by the end of the episode. My name is Kelly Kanopik, and I'm excited to share this episode with you called My Plans Weren't His. This is my good friend Stacy Harder, and make sure you catch the entire episode when our plans are not his and there's hope in the dark. So I always give like a little backstory. I met Stacy at church, a long time ago. And how old was Landon? He was
maybe like 5.
Okay. So how many years ago was that?
5.
Okay. So 5 years ago.
He's 10.
Yeah, okay. So 5 years ago, I was his Sunday school teacher. Wow. Anyway, Stacy came in, I didn't know anything about her, and then a couple of years later we ran into each other again, and I really got to know her well, and now she's like my spiritual advisor. She's an amazing person. You laugh, but you are. She will call me out on my shit almost on a daily basis, and just kind of help me through trials and tribulations, which is really what this whole podcast thing is all about. So today our topic is on suicide. And the sentence that I came up with that really made me think about it, because I've suffered with it too, is how dark it is before the dawn. And I just really want to let Stacy get into her story, on how she went through what she went through and came through on the other side of it. And I know for me, it is a struggle. It's something that I've dealt with in the past, about 8 years ago. And I still fight some depression and things like that, but there is hope on the other side. And once we find that, it is really when we start to flourish. So go ahead, Stacey.
Where am I starting?
Okay, well.
Because honestly, like for me, depression was something that it's in my first memories. You know, I grew up in a religious household. I don't know that has anything to do with my depression, but, it was, we had this situation where it was very much about the external, and what we projected wasn't what was going on at home. And
similar to exactly what Facebook is and Instagram is on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Way before that happened. But, there was a lot of pressure put on me as a child to perform and to succeed. I grew up with my brother, who was the golden child, who was like straight A students.
Every family has one of those.
Yeah, and then every family has one of me, which is the black sheep. And so, there was that growing up and feeling like I wasn't enough. Always like I wasn't enough, I didn't fit. And I was told that. Out in the world, especially out in, the church environment, it was, I was a good kid, I was a quiet kid, I was, had all the right answers for everything. I was the kid in Sunday school who, could tell you, I had my hand up for everything. I was like that. And, but, I was sad. I was a sad little kid. And, in my family, we collect mental illnesses like other people collect china, so we have schizophrenia, we have bipolar disorder, we have chronic depression, and for me, the chronic depression is really the standout. I have kind of, up until, more recently, my settings were either suicidal or okay. And I didn't know anything outside of that. And
it wasn't anywhere in between there. You didn't know what to do.
No.
Right.
No, there wasn't. And, my first suicide attempt was when I was 15. And I look back on it. It sounds ridiculous. I was going to get a C in PE. But in my family, that was huge,
Yep.
And, when I fell short of expectations in my family, it was sitting at a table with my father this far from me, yelling at me for an hour. And so I knew I couldn't handle that. Mm-hmm. And I remember that. I remember I lived like a mile away from the drugstore. So I woke up one morning. I even have this in my diary of like, I don't know why everybody else isn't going to, kill themselves. Like, to me, it made total sense that like you're sad, like you take yourself out, and it just, again, it sounds ridiculous unless you've been depressed and you've been in that situation before. So I remember I picked up my gigantic purse and I walked a mile to the drugstore and I bought this huge bottle of sleeping pills, but I also bought a pack of tampons because I was like, because in my mind I was like, well, like if they see me buying like a 15-year-old kid who like, I looked like a depressed kid, buying a big bottle of sleeping pills, like they're going to know something's up. So I was like, but if I buy a pack of tampons with it, it's going to look like I'm planning on living a life.
The rationalization. And we'll get to that too, because you did a whole story, but we'll talk about, but that's that whole, I mean, we talked about this before we did this episode, and a lot of people who haven't been through the depression and the suicidal thoughts, we can laugh about it now because we're farther removed from it, but it is kind of comical when you look back and so, okay, I bought tampons because I needed, I needed a cover up.
Yeah, and I mean, part of it I think was like I was a smart kid. I didn't see it at the time, and I don't know that I used my smarts for anything better than like buying tampons and sleeping pills, but my plan was to take the entire bottle and go to sleep that night and not wake up the next morning. It was a Saturday night, and I went in to take my bath, and I was going to take my bath and take all the pills. And I remember I was about like, I wasn't good at taking pills either, so it probably wasn't the best choice for me. And I remember I was like 4 or 6 pills in, and it was that moment of realization of like, this is it, Stacy. This is it. This is like the finality of it hit me. And I knew that I didn't want to die, in that moment. And I came out of the bathroom and I was crying, and I told my parents, and, they hugged me and they loved me. But at the end of that, it was, like I said, it was a Saturday night and church was the next day. My father said, don't tell anybody.
Oh. Don't
tell anybody. And it was like I went from that feeling of love and acceptance to boom, shame. Mm-hmm. Absolute shame, and nobody should ever know that you feel like this.
Yep.
And I remember just thinking, like I was right back to being the black sheep and the person that they were ashamed of. And so
it's crazy how I remember, and my dad's a great dad, but I remember being called stupid because I couldn't hit the ball, a tennis ball, over, because I played softball, so I always hit it over the net. Why are you so stupid? And those little comments are just, now I work with kids, so those little comments I see, they can make a huge impact.
Right.
And that shame that you felt.
Mm-hmm. And I know, like, my parents loved me, but they had absolutely no idea what to do with this, depressed kid. Mm-hmm. And, so there was no counseling. There was nothing like that. There's, no meds. And
I think when we were younger, counseling wasn't as prevalent either.
Well, and later on I did, I went to rehab when I was 17, and that got me into, counseling and introduced me to antidepressant meds, which I hated. Mm-hmm. And so from that time, I took antidepressants for a short time when I was 17, and then I was against it until I was about to turn 30, and I was, wanting to have a child. Mm. And I knew that at that point I needed to do something, but going backwards, like prior to that, like, in my 20s, and I always had, like, the depression was there, and it was strongly there, but I always had this feeling of, if you just keep going, Stacy, if you just keep going, like, I kept feeling like there was going to be something there. Mm-hmm. There was going to be some sort of light around the corner.
Couldn't see at the end of the tunnel, but it's got to be around.
No, like I wasn't in a tunnel. I was in catacombs, and I did, and as a teenager, I had my faith. I came to believe in a God very young. I had a lot of faith in that God. And that was, one of the things that kept me afloat for a really long time was, I didn't believe that, this was the way that I was supposed to be living. And so when I was about 29, I was starting to think about getting pregnant, and I went on antidepressants, and it was a game changer. Absolutely, and I was terrified of it ahead of time because I thought, oh, I'm an edgy person. I'm edgy and I'm creative and all these things, and this is going to take the edge off of me. Mm-hmm. And really, I stopped hating people so much anymore. I was like, oh my gosh, everybody's so much nicer now that I'm on meds. And that was one of the first things I came out and talked about, with my friends was I was like, I hadn't talked about my depression. I mean, people knew that I was just kind of like a little, I don't know, not nice, or edgy. Oh, it was edgy. I'm using my nice words. But the reason behind it, I think, people didn't understand because I didn't talk about it. So then I began to talk about the depression. And so I will say, meds were a life changer. They were a game changer for me, but they weren't everything.
Right.
And so I had my daughter, and, I had my son, and I had also addiction issues on top of that. And I went through a period of time where I basically quit on my own. I've always wanted to be better. I've wanted to be better. I've wanted to be more. And I went through this period of time with about, 3 years where, I didn't drink, I didn't smoke. I was working on exercise and how I ate, and I was bettering myself. And
it's funny because we were at church. I would always I would look at you and some of the people up in the fellowship band and worship band. It's like, oh, they have all their shit together. I wish I could be like that.
And it's that perception. I mean, I did the same thing too. I was like, why am I the only person who sucks at life? And I really thought that. And to a certain extent, I kind of really did. I really sucked at life. But when, I had this period of time where I was really working on myself, and but I was really lonely. I was really lonely. I don't like to allow people to help me. I was parenting 2 kids, and my husband was busy doing legitimate things. And, one night I was putting the kids to bed, and he had stuff to do at church, and I was just kind of I'm done. I'm tired, and I went to the medicine cabinet, and, he had pain pills there for his back that he'd never taken because he's not like me. And, I remember he was about to walk out the door, and I was like, screw this, and I remember I took one of those pain pills, and I was like, it's kind of take that. And
I'll poison myself and you'll see. Poison,
yeah, well, it was I'm going to have fun. You're going out, but I'm going to have fun. And it's he wasn't even going out.
Church.
He was going to church, but it was I have to put these kids to bed by myself. I have to do this. I have to do this. And I got so stuck in that. And I had never asked for help, So that, one pill that I took sent me down on this really long spiral that lasted 9 days. And in 9 days, I crossed all these lines that I swore I would never cross, and like I said, I hadn't touched any substances for 3 years, but once I picked that stuff back up again, it was boom, I was right back where I was, and worse, doing things that I swore I would never do. I was a nurse, and I stole script pads, and I wrote a prescription for myself, and I remember, walking into the pharmacy with my babies on either side of me and holding their hands and passing the script to the pharmacist that I had written myself, and going I had that moment of this is the way I'm going to have to live the rest of my life. This is exactly the way I'm going to have to live the rest of my life. And it was frightening, because I thought, I thought I finally got to that point where I had overcome everything. And in that moment when I said, this is how I'm going to have to live the rest of my life, it was you're doomed.
Right.
You are absolutely doomed. And I'm not one of those people that would ever let myself be the person under the bridge.
Right.
The idea of people.
I'm a higher class.
Yeah, right.
I'm a higher lower class.
Right. I was well, I didn't want people to pity me. you know, and I was so good at like keeping that outside facade that like I would rather die than have people think less of me.
Right.
And so that's why, you know, I tried to kill myself, because I would rather die. And, you know, so
that decision when you said, okay, that's it, I'm done. After was it after that 9 days of torture? It was like, I don't want to live like this.
yeah,
After
and
this.
nobody knew what was going on at home. You know, I was taking the pain
It's not
pills.
like you were caught and
No.
you were you know, running from the law and you had no money. And
Not at that point.
You had you had a house, you had kids, you had a husband.
I had a
you
great job.
You had a great job, and on the facade of everything, it was awesome, right?
Yeah, and you know, so it was day 9, and I kissed my kids goodbye. Or my mother-in-law likes to remind me of the fact that I didn't kiss my son goodbye because he was having a fit. But you know, I got in the car and said, I'm going to work, and I knew the whole way that I wasn't going to go to work. And I remember I pulled into a Publix parking lot. It was right down the road from my work, and I sat in my car and I was crying, and I said, God, you're not there. You're not there, or you would save me. And it was the very first time I had ever given up, you know, and felt completely alone, like, you know, my God wasn't there. And and it does for me too, but only because of what happened after that, you know. And I bought a bottle of wine because none of the liquor stores were open, and I had, you know, a full bottle of Xanax because I had written myself a prescription. I found out I didn't really like Xanax, so I was like, what the hell? Like, this is going to work, you know, like we can use this to off ourselves. So, and also, you know, I thought, well, maybe this isn't enough. Maybe this isn't enough. So I called in another prescription for myself. And when I tried to go pick it up, I had been drinking at that point, and I was drunk enough that they wouldn't give it to me. So yeah.
That's God doing for you.
Well,
and for
and
yourself.
and yeah, and even more, you know, so I went back to the hotel, and I'd always had this fantasy of like, when I committed suicide, what it would look like. And I'd done this over and over in my head because I'd been suicidal.
You did your hair and your makeup, right?
I was totally going to. So here was my fantasy. My fantasy was I was going to go to Nordstrom, and I was going to buy like this beautiful dress, and I was going to do my makeup and do my hair, and I was going to overdose, and then I was going to lay myself out on the bed, like really beautiful. So like when they found me, it wouldn't be traumatic. It wouldn't be traumatic.
Feces and
you know,
all that stuff. No.
They would be like, she was so beautiful. And so like, okay, reality was, you know, they found me on the floor in the shower because I had been trying to smoke a cigarette in the shower, in my scrubs because I was going to go to work. You know, it's like, why did I think it had to be a pretty thing? So what had happened was, you know, I called in that prescription for myself, and then I shut off my phone. And because I had made that phone call when my husband checked my phone records, you know, to backtrack, I was supposed to pick up my kids that day. And it's one of those things, this is a part that's always hard to talk about. I used to meet my mother-in-law kind of in between my work and her house to pick up my kids, and in this parking lot over by the airport. And, you know, so she was there as far as everybody knew I had been at work that day, and I didn't show. And she waited there for an hour for me to show up. And I was not the kind of person who would just not show up for something. And so, you know, I think about that, about my babies in the car waiting for me. My husband didn't know where I was because I wasn't the kind of person who just disappeared. He got a call from my work that I didn't show up. And so he tried to file a missing persons report, which you can't do until somebody's been gone for 24 hours. So he thought maybe I had been carjacked. They had no idea. And they checked my phone records. They checked my phone records, and they saw that this, you know, in this particular city, I had made this particular phone call. And we had a friend who lived out there, my husband's best friend. And he put his son to bed that night, and he said, I can't go to sleep knowing Stacy's out there. And he got in the car, and he drove in the middle of the night for 2 hours. For 2 hours, not knowing where I could be. And at the very last, you know, before he was going to go home, he drove to this hotel, and he said, God please show me where she is. And his headlights shone on my car. And I had, for whatever reason, I had bought more sleeping pills, and for whatever reason, I had left the box on the passenger seat of my car. And he saw that, and he went inside, and he said, my friend's wife is here, and I know that she's going to be trying to kill herself. And they wouldn't say whether I was there or not. So they called the police. The police came and took the door off the hinges. They found me. My husband said that when they brought me out, he thought I was dead already. Because I looked dead. And if I had been there until the morning, I would have been dead, because my kidneys were shutting down. I had gone into this state called rhabdomyolysis, where your muscles break down, and it clogs up your kidneys, and your kidneys shut down.
Right.
And so, I remember brief little flashes of being in the hospital, and then finally coming to in the ICU, and telling the nurses, like, take the IV out of me, take all the tubes out of me. And I remember she held up my urine bag and she said, look at this. And it was dark. And she said, you're sick. You're sick. Your kidneys are shutting down. You cannot go anywhere. I couldn't use my legs for several days. And so I was in the hospital for 6 days, and literally because I couldn't use my legs, I was flat on my back, and I couldn't do anything. And, I'd never been apart from my babies, ever. I had never not put my babies to bed. And I remember laying there, and my husband had brought my iPad, and I remember Googling survivors of suicide, because I thought, okay, like, I'm alive. I didn't plan on being alive. And he had come in. I had finally said, okay, I'll see family, and he had come in, and he had explained to me what had happened, and I was so grateful for that, but I didn't know what to do.
Right.
I didn't know what to do. I hadn't planned on living. And so I Googled survivors of suicide, and all that would come up were the family members that were left behind when somebody would try to kill themselves. And so that's what, when you look up survivors of suicide, that's who comes up. But I couldn't find anything for people like me, people who had lived and hadn't meant to. And so I would just lay there, and I would cry. I kept saying, I wish it was a year from now. I wish it was a year from now. And God spoke to me then, and it's crazy, and when God speaks to me, or when it's been 2 times in my life,
Right.
That I've heard God's voice, and I hear it, inside rather than hear it as, like an outside voice. But he said, this relationship is the only one that matters, Stacy. This one. This is the only one that matters. Everything that you're worried about with other people's perceptions of you, of yourself as a mother, of yourself as a person, of, all these other things. He was like, this is it.
This is it.
Make this work first, and everything else is going to fall into place. And I remember I had the TV on, I was watching cooking shows. So I'd watch a cooking show, and then I'd hear God talk to me, and then I'd start crying, and I'd cry for a little while, and then I'd watch another cooking show. It was like this whole cycle. It was this whole cycle. And then, I got home, and about a week after I got home, the cops came and knocked on my door. And they were
a
whole new chapter
started.
Yeah. And I found out that, that phone call that I had made that saved my life also had gotten me in trouble with the law, because I broke a law. And that also ended up being this huge blessing for me, because I couldn't go back to work.
Right.
I ended up, getting charged with some stuff. I was put on probation. After I completed probation, my charges were dropped. But, that God handed me that period of time where I had to stop. Mm-hmm. I had to stop. I had to focus on my family. I had to focus on my relationship with him. And, it was a real gift, but it took me a long time to figure out what to do with myself. It wasn't this immediate healing. after that.
Well, I told you I was doing some of the research on suicide and the suicide hotlines and things like that, and they were talking about usually it is based from depression, and it's based, what they listed was not knowing what your purpose is or trying to find a purpose, and then not knowing that there is a reason that you're here. Of course, they don't talk about God, but I mean, who else would say find a purpose? You have a reason, and then that you're not alone. And again, circles back to something that's more than you or greater than you, finding your purpose, not alone, there is a reason, I matter, and then I can make a difference. And you said something in the beginning of our discussion is that you found, I remember how you said it, you found out that you actually can help people or be helpful, and I don't remember how you said it, but basically you found a purpose in helping others and being helpful.
Yeah, I mean, when I went into recovery, and that again was a long process, but I remember like early on my husband saying, Stacy, all this stuff that's happened to you, you're going to use it someday. And he's not like one of those people that makes like pronouncements.
Right.
But he said, you're going to use this for good someday. And I couldn't imagine what that would look like. Like to me when, and that happened after, the suicide attempt too, was people would say things like, oh my gosh, God has a great plan for you. You're going to do such wonderful things with your life, which is like a whole lot of pressure to put on somebody who's really depressed. And I didn't know, like I thought, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to be like getting up on stage speaking to people? Like I can't do that. And, so when I got into recovery, I was put in this situation where I had to ask people for help, and I had to accept it. And it was the only way that I was going to get better. And the beautiful way that, the program that I'm in works is after people help you, you get the opportunity to help other people. And I remember, this one moment in particular, my friend had a cousin who was in a treatment center. And I remember she told me about that, and out of nowhere I said, do you want me to go visit her? And then I was like, oh my God.
I just said
like,
that.
I just said that, and I can't take it back.
back.
And I thought, what am I going to say to her? Like, what do I have to offer anybody? What do I have to say to her? And I remember, I met her, and we sat down together, and all I did was ask her about herself. I said, tell me about why you're here. And she did. And I told her about what I had been through. And, neither one of us had anything like huge, like life-defining, to say to each other. But, it was two women sitting there who had been through the exact same thing. And I came home after that, and my husband said, how did it go? And I just started to cry, and I'm not a crier. And I just started to cry, and I said, I feel useful for the first time in my life. Really, for the first time in my life, I feel useful. And I was like, oh, it was like that click of like, that's what it's about. That's what it's about. All that stuff that happened, all that bad stuff, all that stuff that I thought made me like a bad person or a broken person, like all that I got to use, and I still get to use, in different ways, not just in my recovery, but just in everyday life.
She did this. Okay, what is it called? Because you did this.
Oh, the moth.
And again, it talks a little bit about your story, and you have to see it. It is on her. It's on your Facebook. It's on my Facebook,
okay. And if you pull up Stacy Harder on YouTube, it's the only thing on my channel right
maybe
now.
I'll share it on my channel. I'll share, or maybe you can share it to my channel.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing because she has this levity and she has this discussion. But tell a little bit about that, and then.
This about the story, or about getting into it.
That you're being able to use it for something else. That you're being able to use your story for something else, and then after the fact, when you got finished with that 2 minutes of a segment, that you had people come up to you.
Yeah, well, just to start, like I had when I first started getting sober, there was this man, and he said, I remember he had like years of sobriety, and he said, find the thing that you are most afraid of doing, that you've wanted to do so badly, and do that thing. And that was, I just did this moth story a couple months back, and he said this. I heard him say this like almost 8 years ago, So I held on to that, and I thought, what is the thing? Well, I knew like there were all these things I wanted to do, but I was so messed up for so long, and it's so interesting. Like when I do the right thing, the timing comes about. And when I know that it's time, it's time. And I turned 44. I wanted to do something big for my birthday, and I looked and I said, I can do this thing. The Moth has story slams down in Miami. And I was like, what the heck? I'm going to go down there, stick my name in a bag, and we'll see if I can tell a story. And I worked for weeks on this thing, weeks and weeks and weeks. And, and I got up and I told this story about how when I had been arrested, the night I was arrested, I was so eager to get out of jail after I had been released that it was like, 3 a.m, and I ran out the back door and didn't realize you can't get back in again. And so I'm stuck out there, and it was this just this incredible metaphor for what my life was. That my life was just about running away and getting myself in these horrible situations, and about standing still. About having to stand still for a minute to find my way back to where I was supposed to be.
And that's what she tells me quite often. Just stay
Just
still.
be still
Just
and
be
breathe.
still and breathe.
Breathe.
And pray and listen. And you can only listen if you're still. You can't listen if you're moving.
And that was something like a
I'm
friend of
like,
mine told me.
All right, Stacey, I gotta go.
Yeah. And it was something a friend of mine told me, like when I talked to her about prayer, she said, Stacey, prayer is talking, and she said meditation is listening.
Yep.
And how often are you really still? And I was like, I'm not. Like my brain was never still. Meds have helped that too.
All right, so is there a statement or anything that you would say as far as turnaround on maybe some hope that if you are, feeling hopeless, wanting to commit suicide, wanting to if you're at that place of that, it's never going to get better, what kind of hope do you think that you can give somebody that might be watching or listening?
I mean, the absolute first thing somebody has to do is speak it out loud, because my husband said the most frightening thing about me was I would look like everything was completely normal. And he said, when I would get depressed and when I would, take these steps to suicide, because it was more than just that one time.
Right.
He said it was like lightning hitting him on a clear day. So to speak those things out loud to somebody that you trust is the beginning. To seek some sort of professional help, because I don't believe medication is for everybody. It is for me, is another. There are lots of things out there you can try, but also to find a sense of community, and for me, that's been like the absolute keystone in all of this is, I found my group of people. For me, my group of people are in recovery, but really slowly it's starting to expand into other things as well.
We were laughing before the segment. We were laughing because she says, it doesn't have to be recovery, and she said it could be church, and I record in a gym. I said it could be the gym. She goes, I don't like exercise. What about a book club?
Yeah. And it's different. It's really different things for different people. But a place where you feel like your people are, that you can connect with, and I don't know that it's something you find right away. It's really something that involves a lot of soul searching, But I would say that's the key for me is finding that community. But there is hope, I mean, if I have come out on the other side of this, and I can go